me, so I'll see. I'll let you drive.
Thank you, sir. Okay. All right. So here's where we're picking up from. We're going to start with like we usually do. We step back about 5 yards. Take a look at where we finished up because we were, in a lot of lectures, you get brain fried anyway at the end. I know I was, and I'm teaching it. So I always think it's a good idea to step back about 5 yards, take a look at some of the things that we did, and then it kind of gives a good running start into tonight's lecture. So what I want to do is we'll just jump right into a quick, and I hope it's a quick review because I hope this made sense to you. These are the formulas I want to just kind of quickly touch on current performance formulas. The simple variances of schedule and cost, and then the indexes, the performance indexes of schedule and cost at a current performance. The whole idea of what earned value means, right? That it's work actually completed. I mean, all of that, and how I came up with these numbers to do these examples. Before we get to EAC and all that, Aubrey, did you, and you're the only one I can ask, okay, are you all right with these four current performance formulas?
Yes, sir, I am.
Good. And I guess, and again, I just want to stress again that these are wild results, okay? Because I wanted to show, big results from the equations, so you can see the power of them. And the other thing that stresses is that on a small project, okay, a big swing could even a few $100s could be a big deal, right? So it's just something to understand. I'm glad you understand this. So let's talk about the forecast side now. Now remember that forecasting is based on current performance. So it was important to have a foundational understanding of the EV, PV, AC, and how we take a snapshot at the time. Because whatever forecast we're forecasting on, we're saying if we stay on performance like we are today. And I introduced, we talked about the three big variables that will make up most of the formulas you're going to need to know for the forecasting side of earned value. BAC, which is budgeted completion. That's what I've introduced this to you in maybe three different ways. It is your cost baseline, and it is the total planned value for your project. So those are, and in the exam, you're probably going to see it worded in one way or another, but those are three good with budgeted completion is just like I said, okay, it can be looked at as really the cost baseline for the entire project or the entire planned value for the entire project. EAC, which is estimate at completion, and that is when we start to see some overruns. We're now doing, we're behind schedule or we're over budget, and we're not going to hit BAC. So currently we're at an EAC, but that doesn't mean now on a well-run project, like I said, the examples I'm giving you now are wild swing ones so that you can see them for a class. But in the real world, you're not going to be, you're probably driving the project pretty well. You're still going to see an EAC every year, and because you are going to maybe be overrunning a little bit, or so you're going to make adjustments. So today's snapshot, you have an EAC and that's going to exceed a BAC, but that doesn't mean that over the course of the rest of the project, you can't do those nips and tucks and pick up areas. Good project managers are always looking for. What I'm saying is that just like anything else, we're driving our project within tolerances. All right, we set all of these back in time management, cost management. We decided, particularly cost management, we decided on that we were going to use earned value to measure our performance, all right? What our tolerances were going to be. That if I saw an EAC that was exceeding by X, okay, now I have a problem, but within tolerances and such. So if we're okay, we have time. And the other one was estimate to complete. I'm sorry, I clicked 1 second too early. Estimate to complete is exactly what it sounds like. So the snapshot we take today that we're already 3 months into a 12-month project, that means from this point forward, the last 9 months of the project, this is what we think we're going to need. That's estimate to complete. You're going to see it in a couple of different forms, but really that's the basis of an EAC calculation, is that we've already done X amount of work that can be accounted for in actual costs, and we're going to have some sort of formula or calculation or estimate of what's left to be done. The sum of the two is an estimate at completion. Okay, so that kind of simplifies. And I point out when we get the EAC, that's really where, if there's any confusion here about these formulas, because none of them so far I've showed you have any real complexity to them at all. In fact, the ones I showed you in current performance was simple arithmetic and division and subtraction. Here, it's no different. There's no rocket science here. So let's take a look at the 4 EAC formulas that you need, and the idea is that they're situational. So within the question, and remember, I want to remember that this is a PMP prep course. Within the question, they're going to give you enough information so that you can infer or outright just be told what formula of the 4 that you're going to need to use, all right? They may make you flex your brain a little bit, but I assure you within the question, they're going to give you enough to answer which EAC formula you're going to need. And also within the body of the question, there's going to be enough information to fill in the variables that you're going to need when you do pick the formula you're going to need. Look, I'm sorry. You okay? I guess you're okay. I'm just going to keep going, Chief, because I want to get us. So remember, I introduced you to this, and I really think this is a very good graph, okay? Because it really does explain. I showed you here in the beginning of the lecture. Here's our snapshot where we took our earned value management form calculations for the current performance right here. Actual cost, plan value up to date, and earned value up to date, all right? And the difference, and we can just, without even doing a calculation, we can see this project is over budget and behind schedule because we're underperforming on the earned value side and we're overspending on the actual cost side. Looking forward, we can see that plan value, okay, runs the rest. This is what we planned all the way through. So there's our BAC, which is the entire plan value of the project, like I told you before, which is your cost baseline spread out across the timeline of the project. And I said now there are 4 calculations that you need to know for the exam for EAC, and they're situational. So we say to yourself, the first question you have to answer is, when I take my snapshot today, I'm seeing variances, the schedule variance, the cost variance, all right? And I'm saying, are these variances typical of what I'm going to see moving forward? Or are they atypical, meaning they're just anomalies? I'm seeing them now and I won't see them later. It's an easy enough question to ask and answer, okay? And I assure you they're going to give you enough information in the question to point you in the right to the right formula, particularly when it comes to typical, atypical. Because they want to give you enough, or they want you to get the answer right. They just want you to pick the right formula. So you're going to read the question, and I'm telling you, I can't stress that anymore. That I've heard that so many times that you did a great job answering the wrong question, and we don't want that to happen. So we're going to answer the first question we're going to ask when it comes to EAC is, are the variances typical or atypical? Because of the 4 formulas, really the confusion is between the first 2. The number 3 and 4 kind of are certainly situational and definitely can't be mistaken. So let's take a look at the 4 and what I mean. First off, this is the one that you would use if I believe that I have typical variances today are going to be typical for the rest of the project. This is typical of a well-run project. All right. My examples I have wide ranges because I want you to see them, but this is every day. A well-run project is running pretty much to plan. So we expect it to run the plan. We planned that it was going to be where the costs, for instance. So the actual cost, like I said, it's really the better indicator of either cost or schedule performance of the true health of the project. So that's why it's the denominator here, because really it's how we're applying our cost baseline across the timeline. And while we're doing that, it's really our best way to tell whether we're going to be on BAC or we're going to hit an EAC number. This is typical We're saying what we see today is what we're going to see tomorrow, what we're going to see. We know what we're doing here. We're going to use this formula. So I plugged in my ridiculous numbers here, and I came up with this. And the reason I'm showing you ETC here is that they may ask you the question, asking you to identify ETC. You can't get there until you first did EAC. So they're forcing you. So some of these questions are going to force you to be 2 and even 3-part questions. So I'm going to show you when we get to mock exams, I'm going to show you a couple of those. And I hope that as you guys, progress and get closer to exam date and you're doing all your, you're really boning up and practicing a lot, that you look at questions like that, where you're going to have to figure out something first before you can get to the next equation and give them the answer that they want. Remember that formulas are equations, right? Meaning they can be flipped around. So they may give you information to solve something. Don't memorize everything in block orders, what I'm saying. Being able to do your formulas and flip them around and still do them, and you can, and you're probably going to have that happen to you a couple of times on the exam. This is the typical one. This is the one you use for atypical. So like I said, this is the only real, I won't say the only real, but this is where I see most of when somebody says, Clark, I don't get the EAC formulas. It's because they're confused about what they mean about typical and atypical. And it means the variances that I'm seeing in today's performance report. What do I think? This is what I think they're atypical, meaning that, these are just ramp ups. These are bumps in the road. We've learned our lesson now, however I want to put it, but from now on, smooth sailing, okay? And it shows you, and I'm telling you that in the formula, because the second half of the formula says smooth sailing. It says back to cost baseline again, minus my earned value. I'll be okay from now on. That's what I'm saying here, okay? And I'll be back on some sort of track again. I know my overruns are already here. There's nothing I can do about it, but I'll be okay from this point forward, and we can usually live with that. That's the difference between these two formulas. And again, I plugged in the ridiculous calculations so you can see wide swings. Here's ETC again, just to reinforce that you might have to do a 2-part formula, okay? The first formula we had to do CPI as the denominator. I said this on Monday. That's a 3-parter. Where first you got to figure out CPI, then plug that into the EAC formula, then plug that into the ETC formula. So you got to move, all right, on that question. The third formula for EAC was this one, when you're going to use a whole new bottom-up estimate to complete. That's what this second part of that formula, of this basic rockhead formula, is, that we're saying to ourselves that we don't trust our numbers anymore, or in some way, shape, or form, some way, in some language, that's what they're going to tell you in the question, that you're going to recalculate, you're going to re-estimate the work left to be done. If you're going to do that, that's what they mean, a bottom-up estimate to complete. So look at this formula and see, why would I use it at this point? Because I don't trust my BAC right now, so I want to come up with something new. And I'm already into a project, so I can't start from scratch. I have to take what I've already spent, so that's my AC, and I'm going to take all the work that's left to be done, and I'm going to do a better job this time. Me and my experts they were my experts in the beginning, and we're going to sit down and we're going to do it better this time. Apparently, our estimates were sloppy, or our assumptions were wrong, or we did something, and we need to kind of redo it again right midstream. So we're going to pick up what's left to be done and do a good estimate, add it to the mess we've already created. That's going to be our EAC. And again, you figure to get the EAC, to ETC. The fourth formula is when there's going to be some kind of they're really going to care more heavily on the cost performance or schedule performance. So it's going to be weighted, and they're going to tell you that. Either the client is cost performance intolerant. They want you some kind of language saying that you're going to have to put emphasis on either CPI or SPI or both. This is the formula you pick. I can't see them giving you more than 1 or 2 questions like that of this formula. And of the 4, this is the longest, so it's the most complex, but it's not complex at all. I mean, we're simple. It's simple. It's just simple calculation here. And you just plug in just like anything else. Once you identify the variables, just plug and play. So you can see here what I've done is I plugged in the variables that I had from my current performance. And here's my EAC, worst case scenario. All right. To complete performance index was meaning from an index to 1, right? Meaning 1 was on plan. Right now, we're so far behind schedule. If I wanted to try to get back to BAC, well, how hard would I have to work? How hard would I have to? So I can't even crash the schedule, because to crash the schedule means I'm going to add costs. They want me to come back somehow, I guess, in this case, it's going to be impossible. As you can see, I'm going to have to work 3.5 times to plan from this point on to get back to plan. So, and again, this is an outrage. We would have never let it get to this far, but that's what TCP and PI means. Relative to 1, relative to our original plan from this point forward. So in the real world, you're probably going to see a 1.1 or a 1.3, something like that, and it will be within tolerance that we set back in cost management. If it starts to get out of tolerance, all right, it's an indication that we're not going so well. Your numbers tell us a story. If nothing else, it's ringing an alarm bell that calls for further analysis. Really, and the best way to get the root cause, because you get the root cause, you fix problems for good. But anyway, you need to know these calculations. And variance at completion is simply like I showed you in current performance. It's a raw variance from where we're supposed to be to what we are from our so think of planned value at any given time. Think about it at the end, okay? That the planned value was our BAC, and what did we really spend, and the difference between the two is the raw variance. And of course, we overran here. Know these formulas. So before I move into risk management, I think that's where we're going. And again, here's this screen. Before I move into risk management, I think is my next thing. Yes, it is. Aubrey, you're the only one I can ask. Is there anything I can explain to you that you don't get?
I get it. I've been practicing, so I'm getting it.
You're gonna.
I just got to figure out when to use them, but that's really about it. But I'm okay.
Good, and that's a good answer. And I'm assuming the same with Jill, because I'm not hearing. But well, she's on vacation. But you know, it's like I said. I think it's my job in this course, okay, to make sure that you understand what you're looking at and the mechanics. It's your job now to get yourself ready for that exam. So, I mean, the more you practice doing network diagrams, all I can do is show you forward and backwards pass and make sure that there's no question in your mind how to do it. You got to do it enough that you're proficient for the exam. I cannot hold your hand any further, but if there's any questions, and there's not. So now I want to jump into risk management. And like I said, when we get into, at the end of the last couple of lectures, we're going to have time to do some problems together. But I want to get back into the planning phases again, because we did jump out to look at earned value. All right. And so again, here's where we're at. All right. We have a plan now. I've showed you time, cost, and scope. And of course, as we know, we never really got to that baseline yet until we've listened to all the rest of those knowledge areas, those big areas that I showed you. There's actually 10. One of them being integration management. So the other 9 were areas of impact, things that can really cause a major impact, a particularly negative impact to your project, things like resources and risk and quality. You have to have those knowledge areas chime in on your planning processes so that they're taken into account, and that there's flexibility built into your plan. And so you do this through the progressive elaboration. You don't want to be hit with a baseball bat in the middle of your projects, like so many projects happened before this methodology got smart. I assure you, early versions of PMBOK didn't really talk about risk management and quality management like it should have. And that's because project management really was truly about the triple constraint back in the day. Bring it in, bring scope in, on time and cost, time and cost, time and cost, and that was really what it was all about. and quality suffered if it had to make time and cost happen. It's sad to say, but it's true. And risk really wasn't taken into consideration as it should be. Anyway, we're going to progressively elaborate, and I'm going to get into risk management, which is it's a really a big one here. And I'm glad that, again, I'm very proud of my profession, that we're evolving, okay, and we're learning that, particularly risk. And if you look at risk, I told you that some of these are so deep of subject, that, like schedule management, for example, that it has its own credential. Same here in risk management, that there's a risk management professional credential from PMI, because it really does get deep. You'll see, particularly when I get into the quantitative, when I start talking about some of the quantitative stuff, where being a risk management professional, tying it all together, not just from individual risks, but looking at risks in pools and categories and overalls, and it's a lot of smart guy stuff. You need to take it in consideration, though. I would say even rudimentarily, just the fact that if you never did it before in your organization, if you just start by identifying risk categories, just like we've done with everything else we did with requirements, when we built scope, and when we identified resources. So you can see what we're going to do is a top-down identification, filtering our way down to a strategy that works for us in a risk. So here again, I bring it back to the screen that risk is talking to, through the integration management, through 4.2, it's talking to time, cost, and scope. It's also listening to all the rest of the knowledge areas all at once. This is done through progressive elaboration. Again, we're still in chiefly in planning. So the project document updates, project management plan updates, or those proverbial buckets that I talk about, that become areas of common knowledge, those documents that we've been building as I'm showing the methodology that we continue to revise and grow through progressive elaboration. So here we are. Let's look at risk management. And I want to show you, again, I love these screens because it gives me a chance to stop and show you, particularly you, Aubrey, who likes to do memorization. Again, I stress, if you want to memorize knowledge areas, because
Hey Clark, I'm not memorizing anymore. I'm actually studying Rita, and she does not have a breakdown, which is it's doing wonders.
That's fantastic. That's great. This is my regular guy way here. I think that if you understand the roles of the knowledge areas, what risk management means to your project, okay, and how you can control it and the tools that you use, then you're going to be fine for the exam. You are. You think about it all the way through. That's why I want to say that I do highly recommend that you memorize the processes within each knowledge area. So here I would know that 11.1 through 11.6, know them. Know these six processes, because they're upstream, downstream. So that's the first reason to know them in the order I'm telling you. But they make sense. They're related to each other. You've seen already in time management that these processes are about building activities and schedules and stuff. So you want to keep, when we're within a knowledge area and you're answering questions on the exam, think in a knowledge area for a knowledge area. The other thing I would show you about risk is, remember I told you that the three that are baseline knowledge areas, time, cost, scope, look like this, where all of their processes are in the planning process group except for their control process. Risk is the fourth. And I like that because risk does indeed rise to the level of a formal constraint. Remember, it's not just the triple constraint anymore. There are 6 constraints that are formal constraints in the PMI methodology. Risk is one of them, quality and resources being the other 2. So I'm glad that risk management rises to that level. And as you can see, it's treated as such. So if you look at the processes, first off, let's take out the .1 process, which is going to be the rules of the road, a big process. But I just want you to take a look at from 11.2 through 11.5. Look like a logical step-by-step process that if we were going to design a way to get our arms around project risk, we would probably come up with these steps if we were smart thinking people. And if you think about it, they mirror exactly, but very, very similar to what we did in scope management and time management. Because what we're doing here is we're going to break things down top to bottom. So from top down, we're going to identify risks as they relate to our project, using breakdown structures, just like we've done, so we don't miss anything. So the same thinking, the funnels and fences thinking that I've been stressing, figures in risk management. So if you can master that concept, you start with funnels and fences. All right, that I'm particularly here in identifying risks. I'll show you that the funnel is at the top. We're still at the top of the funnel. We want to hear all the risks that we could possibly identify, and we're going to funnel them down to the ones we're actually going to worry about. And see what I'm saying? Just like we did with requirements. So back in scope management, when we had a whole lot of requirements, but they all didn't get in. We're doing much of the same thinking, much of the same processes, but in the context of risk, okay? And then again, we have that control process. But you say to yourself, well, Clark, a control process infers that there's a baseline, that there's something that when we actually do take our plan into execution, that we have something to measure against, and we do. Now, PMBOK doesn't call it a baseline. I do. But as good project managers, it is. It's a living baseline. Risk is a living baseline, just like stakeholder management is managed to a living baseline because they're people. The same in human resource management, you notice we don't even have a control process at all because we're not controlling people in that regard. Stakeholders are the same in risk because they're people-based. Risk is a people thing, all right? So it's going to be a moving, living baseline, but we do want to be close to it. We want to know if we're close to what risk means to our project at any given time. So we're going to talk about that in the next couple of screens. All right, so again, risk management is much like what I've already showed you, that if you think about what I'm going to show you in the next several processes as first funneling, so we identify our risks. So we're at the top of the funnel like we were with scope management, right? And like we were, we're open to everything, right? So until we get down here where we can identify the risks that we got to do something about, then we're going to put fences around us. So we're going to establish our metrics and our criteria. Particularly here in risks, we're going to have to establish what risk means to our project and to our organization. And actually, and I don't mean just, well, that's bad and that means really bad. No, what does that mean it has to be quantified. We're going to come up with scales for probability and for impact in particular. And the matrix of the two, okay, are going to give us an idea of what a particular risk it means to our, and I'm going to show you all this. But we have to establish those fences. So first we identify the risks. We're going to establish our fences, so we're going to come up with criteria. We're going to weight the more important criteria. We're going to come up and we're going to establish really the key to risk management and for the exam here is establishing those probability and impact scales, all right? And I'll show you that's coming up so that we can plan our project in bite-sized form so that we can be precise. And we're planning from a risk standpoint. So we're going to put things together in a breakdown structure like we've done before so we don't miss anything top down. The 100% rule will be in effect, and then we'll be able to roll our risks up. We're not doing it so that we can roll them up to add them up, but we're rolling them so that we can account for all of them collectively. So let's take a look. So we're going to create a risk breakdown structure here, and it's going to be one of the main tools that we use that gets us started. Now, in bigger organizations, Joe, you work in J&J, you guys have all this set. And so I'm telling you that even I've been saying it all along, all the subsidiary plans, many of the project documents, historical data may already have been done. There may be processes and procedures where you have to do templates that they're going to make you use, all right? But I have to show you the methodology in a generic form, and I have to show it to you as if we're starting a project completely clueless, that we're starting it from day one. I'm just assembling my stakeholders, and we're talking about big picture stuff and working our way down. If I do that, okay, then you're going to have a better grasp on the methodology, not just for the exam, but for your career. Just like everything else, though, take a look. It starts the breakdown structure. It starts with the entire project itself. So we're looking at the project itself in its entirety. And so the first breakdown is the most important. As I said, the big decision when we do breakdown structures is that level 2, the first breakdown. We want to break this down so that we can look at risk. So what's maybe the best way to look at risk? I'm saying areas of risk. This is particular to your project. So this is where the art comes into the art and science of project management. Is this level 2 choice? You don't have to make this in a vacuum. You don't have to do this by yourself, but you really should look at. And if you can't think of it, then go even bigger picture. That there are going to be areas in time, cost, and scope that there are going to be risks. If you have to start from scratch, then start even that rudimentary. But here, I'm using this example where I'm looking at where I see areas, big areas of risk could manifest themselves in the areas of technical, in areas of external within the organization, and within project management itself, et cetera, et cetera. This work breakdown structure is probably bigger than this level 2, but this is just for an example stage. So, and again, we're going to do exactly what we did before. That this level 2, the 100% rule, I've come up with all the areas that I can think that would of risk, where areas of risk that could manifest themselves that rolled up will constitute the entire project's risk. Okay. Well, underneath each level 2, I'm going to further define areas of individual risks, where risks are pockets of risks. And I'm further decomposing that. You've seen this time and time again. I showed you this in time management. So what does this mean to us as a project manager? That we were doing all this together all along. While we were looking at work packages, we were looking at them in a 360-degree view. We were also looking at risk. So when we were talking to our stakeholders, particularly early, back when the tree is just a frame, it's bare, we're asking early questions. And it gives us a chance here to infuse that level of, that dose of reality that I've talked about. Here's a good place is risk management. We start talking about the size and scope of what they're really talking about. So you're asking a stakeholder to identify, well, where do you see areas of risk for this project? Never thought about it before. Well, I'm asking you to think about it now. The simple fact I'm asking you to think about it now is a very good thing. Because if you hadn't thought about it before, you should have. And now that you are, and you're somebody particularly, maybe it's done projects like this in the past, you're now reflecting back and leaning on your own knowledge. You're going to be a pretty good resource here to help me put together this breakdown structure, to help me make sure I'm not going to miss anything. I'm also referring to good historical data, outside data of other projects, et cetera, to come down with risk. Okay, so but here all I'm doing is I haven't got to identifying what risk means to us yet. Here I'm identifying, I'm still at the point where I'm going to identify the risks for the projects, and I want to stick them in categories so that I can rate them later. First, I need to identify them just like I did with scope. Okay, so that's where we're at. It's a risk breakdown structure, and it's a project breakdown from the perspective of risk, just like I showed you from a perspective of resources. And so therefore, you can kind of put them next to each other. And I'm not saying they're direct overlays, but they certainly correlate to each other, particularly the work breakdown structure, the big kahuna of breakdown structures, because everything's about delivering the scope. Okay, so everything's about delivering the scope. Resources, risk, everything. That when we do these other breakdown structures, we do them in the context of delivering that deliverable. Okay, let me talk about risk now. I talk about risk. If I was to pick one word, and I want to kind of do this because I want to go regular guy here to give us a chance to try to get our hands around risk, because those of us here that have never done risk management before, people, maybe they're even laymen that never thought about risk so much in their lives. When they look at risk, sometimes they look at risk as almost as fate, it's destiny, kind of carrying me along. Whatever happens, happens, and maybe I don't have, so I don't have much control over fate. maybe that's so in life in some situations, but I got to tell you that if you can quantify the uncertainty of something and reduce that uncertainty, you reduce its risk. Because I'm telling you that if I was to come up with one word that really characterized risk, it's uncertainty. What makes something risky is its uncertainty. There are other gentle factors, but what I mean is the less we know about something, the more risky that it is. So the more that we know about it, the less risky it is, generally, right? So I'm asking this question here is when if you look at risk from a worldly view, okay, is it a crapshoot, or can we reduce our risk somehow? Before we take that risk, can we somehow reduce the risk to where it's now something that we can actually stomach and we're willing to take it now? Where a week ago, we weren't. Okay, can we get there? We can. Okay, I'm telling you, not all the time, but good risk management is a simple matter of we can get our arms around our risks and you start to get a little proactive and ready. We can get ahead of the baseball bat hitting us in the head. We don't have to be victims of fate. We don't. So treating risks as a living baseline is where I'm going with this, because I said the other baselines kind of lend themselves to be measured. They're kind of they're those proverbial lines in the sand that can be measured. Scope, for example, it's either in or it's not in, and schedule and time. We're either on schedule or we're on budget or we're not. Right? Risk is something that can even change on a because risk is based on whatever the circumstances are right now. As of right now, this is how risky something is to us. We're already into the project now. The lay of the land, the circumstances have changed, and therefore the risk has changed, and the baseline has moved a little bit. We don't have to be caught by surprise. We monitor our risks on a very regular basis. Every single staff meeting, we monitor our risks. In fact, I'm going to tell you that you're going to assign someone to your team, whether it's you. If you're a team of one, then it's you. But somebody is going to have to explain where we are with the risks every staff meeting. So have risks changed and what's their trick? I'll explain all that as we go a little further. But just the simple fact that we're getting our arms around risks means that we're in a better shape to deal with it, all right? And treating it as a living baseline. So knowing our risks means we can plan strategies for them. There are certain strategies you have to know for the exam, all right, that they're going to ask you directly on the, I'm going to tell you, for negative risks and positive risks. Let me explain, okay? Those strategies we're going to come up with, we want to do two things. We want to reduce the threat of whatever bad can happen to us with a risk. We also want to enhance an opportunity of whatever good can happen if a positive risk event happens. Regular guy to regular guy here, Aubrey. What I mean is, in the real world, there's usually a winner and a loser. And what I mean by that is if something bad happens to somebody, and I don't mean this from heartless, I mean this from an observational standpoint, that when something negative happens to somebody, maybe something positive, someone gains from your loss on the other side of the table. That doesn't mean that we're cold-hearted and things like that, but we do want to see that that if there are good things that can happen, that we identify in our risk management that can happen, and they sometimes they're quite benign. We're not hurting anybody. We're enhancing an opportunity. For example, I'll give you a good one, is that while we're in risk management, we notice that if we purchase our materials now before December, we get 2017 pricing instead of 2018 pricing, and that's going to be we save ourselves 15%. Okay, and that's just something that that's a good, see what I mean? That's an example of a good risk event that we want to make happen. So we're going to plan it into our scheduling that we're going to purchase and deliver our materials that we need in February a little earlier because we're going to take advantage of pricing. Well, it also could mean something that we get ahead of somebody else on a curve, but that's either way. I want you to understand that when we look at risk, we're looking at the future and future events. What do we see could happen? And we're going to strategize for them. So the things that help our project, we're going to try to enhance the probabilities, because that's really what we're talking about. They're making the probability of something happen to enhance it, and then reducing the probability of it happening so that it does, so that it's less likely it happens to us on the threat side, right? And we do this, guys like this have it down to a science. This is what I mean about reducing uncertainty, is that if we get really good at what we do, these guys are working the floor of the stock exchange, right? So stocks are a lot like what I'm talking about here, that they're trying to predict the future, all right? These guys are pretty good because they use a lot of indicators of the health of a stock and the future health of a stock, and the markets and other things that are swirling around. These guys are knowledgeable. So their risk, even on a stock that looks like might be a little risky to you and I that know next to nothing, let's say, about the stock exchange, is not so risky to these guys. And that's where fortunes are made, is in knowledge. And we're going to talk about that when we get into risk appetite, because we need to judge that. What is risky to our organization? We could be working, are we working for people that like to take risks, or people that don't want to take risks? And that might be set in stone. So we're going to get to that here in a few minutes. But we need to do strategies that do this, okay? We also get a measure of measure and control once we take our plan into execution, because we've thought about risks ahead of time. So we are going to have those proverbial plan Bs. We'll talk about those for the really, really high impact, high probability things that could be bad, or even really could be very good, that are going to make things happen. Okay, or if something's bad is going to happen, we have a plan B. Pull it off the shelf, put it into action. These are what good project managers do. That's all tied into those contingency reserves. So remember, we talked about reserve analysis being part of not just cost management, but also a risk management strategy. Here it is. When we get into executing our project, we are going to look at contingency reserves for the known unknowns and the unknown unknowns. And we did that here in risk management, where we actually put those into our schedule, built flexibility in because of risk, not just because we want to put in fluff. We did it because of risk management, okay, which is one of the bigger players here. So let's get to risk again. Let's talk about what I mean when, is it worth the risk? So in the first couple of processes in risk management, we talk about identifying risks and categorizing them. So there was our work breakdown structure. We really haven't weighed that against our risk appetite of what we have is, we said, if we're going to embark on this project, here's the risks that we're going to see. Now we need to know, what does that mean to us? Maybe if just by looking at those risks, it's already too risky, and we're not even going to do the project in the first place. This is what I'm saying is, we need to identify what we're going to talk about, what we say we're calling is risk attitude. Risk attitude for our project, and that's for our project and for our organization. So let's get into some of the things of what I mean is, it's a subjective thing, right? Is it worth the risk? Things like, do we park in a no parking zone for 2 minutes? Do we take that risk? That we're just going to park in that no parking or even a handicap spot for 2 minutes? We're going to run into CVS. We already called.
No.
I'm sorry.
No, because the authority in Philadelphia will get you.
Yeah, man, parking wars. I love that show. Every time I'm downtown, I always say hi to the parking authority people and ask where the camera is, and I make them laugh because I didn't drive down. I don't drive to Center City too much anymore. I take the train. It's a great show, but hey, but it does make it. But it does. The point is valid, right there. Are you willing to take that chance? All right. And it's up to you. Some people take the chance, get away with it. Maybe I'm not downtown. Maybe I'm in the burbs somewhere, right? And for 2 minutes, I jump. That's despicable of me to park in a handicap zone, but I took the chance. I got away with it, all right? It was worth the risk to me. That's where I'm going with this. Flood insurance, things like taking a shortcut from a stranger. These have risk, but risk to me, is it too risky? I may have to take a shortcut from a stranger because I'm in Iowa I got off the plane. It's 3 in the morning. I'm in my rental car, and I can't find Route 216 where my hotel is. So I reduced the risk by pulling into a gas station. So I'm not asking somebody that was walking down the highway, but still, do I take a shortcut from a stranger or not? Maybe that stranger is going to steer me right into a really bad situation. To take that, it's a risk. It's risky to me, is my point here. So we need to think about, once we identify our risks and categorize them, we need a way that we can prioritize them. What is a risk to us? And what is a high risk, medium risk, and low risk? Should we decide to embark on this project? Okay, so there are some things that help us get our arms around risk, to actually put metrics, measurable things around risk, so that it's not a crapshoot anymore, so that it's not fake. The probability. So if we talk about identified risks, between us and our stakeholders, we're going to ask them, what is the probability of this risk happening? Is it 0% all the way up to 100%? See, right there lends itself to be a scale. Believe me, that's what we're going to do. I'm going to ask you to tell me what we identified a risk. One of the things we want to identify is, what's the probability of it actually happening, okay? That figures into our decision about how we're going to treat it as a risk. The other big one is impact. If it does happen, what is its impact on us? Is it a big impact? It's a small impact? This needs to be quantified. So we're going to get there. We may do this in levels where we'll call things, yes, this is a high impact, low impact, but we're going to have to figure on scales. We're going to have to come up with, what does a medium impact mean, dollars and cents wise, for example, and where is it now no longer a medium impact, it's now a more serious impact, because it crossed a certain line that from Measure Act impact. We're going to get these from our stakeholders. So think about our stakeholder management all along, that we've been doing this all along. Here's where we're going to get our risk attitude from. They're going to first identify a risk to us, and we're going to be making them think about risk. And then once we've identified risk, we want them to answer questions like, what do they see as the probability of this, and particularly experienced people? What's the probability of this actually happening? And what's the impact? And again, we're going to consult several viable sources of data. But as you can see, this lends itself to be a matrix. So what access X versus access Y. The probability of something happening versus its impact. I take that risk, each individual risk, and I plug it into that matrix. Somewhere it's going to land in that matrix, in that probability and impact, and we're going to treat it as a red risk, a yellow risk, a green risk, right? Medium, high. Very simple risk management. This gets very, very deep in the real world. But the first time through, this is the first explanation of it, is that we have a bunch of risks now that we've identified and we categorized. I need a way to rate them as per in the opinions of our stakeholders. So now we're looking at trying to come to consensus. So we'll use consensus gathering tools where we're continually whittling down, closing the ranges of what the probabilities, and closing and closing and closing till we come up with a consensus of what these scales, and once we can use them, then we're going to use them to rate our risks. The other thing we want to concern ourselves with urgency. It's a major variable because it's a catalyst, right? You know what a catalyst is? It's almost like it's the chemical that right now there's nothing happening. Well, if I pour this test tube into that test tube, look out, we better get out of here because it's going to explode. All right, urgency is one of those things that are a catalyst. All right, and it's usually not a good thing for the person who has the urgency. Because just like in any good negotiation or anything else, those with the time urgency usually have less options available to them, and usually maybe have to swallow options that they're not happy with or not completely happy with, but they have to get it done because they have the urgency. That needs to be figured into risk, okay? That needs to be figured into risk, that How urgent is this? And so it also figures into our attitude, as how risky it is to us. And so how palatable it'll be at the end. So we need to do urgency assessment, right, on each risk, individually and collectively. And the other, so that we can weigh all of these things against our risk attitude. This is what creates it, is the risk attitude is going to create those scales for us. Those scales of probability, of impact, and urgency are going to be relative to our project, relative to our stakeholders, relative to our organization. They're going to create them, but we have to herd cats now, right? So we need to move them along, because I need scales that I can use, and they're going to have to. So that's where we're going next. So let's talk about that, risk attitude. So we need to identify for the exam, there are 3 parts that consist of a risk attitude. Those 3 parts are this. Risk appetite. This is the original appetite for risk. So in other words, we're still, let's say, in that 11-2, where we're identifying risks. We're the funnel, getting down to the bottom of the funnel. Risk appetite is how much uncertainty, how much risk are we willing to take on? At that case, we were taking on risk and we're going, but as the project moves along, as the planning moves along, as the elaboration moves along, we get to the second one, risk tolerance. How much uncertainty are we willing to put up with? There is a slight and subtle difference. Risk appetite meaning we're willing to take it on in the beginning. It's almost reflective of what our organization is like from a risk attitude standpoint overall. Are we risk takers or not? And we'll talk about that a little bit more here. But we need to define that line. We need to decide what's risky for our folks. For the exam, you know the 3 components that constitute risk attitude. The risk attitude really is your living baseline. If I identify a living baseline, that's it. And the tool that we're going to create, the risk register, is the baseline, the tool that we'll use to baseline our risk moving forward. So it's risk appetite is the first element, how much we're willing to take on. Risk tolerance is how much we're willing to put up with, presumably after we've already taken it on. And the third one is a risk threshold, meaning that we have elements of both, but on an individual basis, that each stakeholder is going to have different thresholds themselves within that on a per risk basis on how they see risk. So it makes it very complex. But the combination, the blending of the 3 gives us a general risk attitude that is going to be used to help us define our baseline, to define our risk baseline. So before I move forward, did you get that, Aubrey? Because you're the only one that can ask. First, we really have to define all of our risks. What we really have to now is define it, measure it against a risk attitude. So, okay, so if you do, so then we need to quantify that risk attitude with probability and impact and urgency, with scales that really mean something that we can measure. So now we're going to be getting into the dot 1, where we're going to come up with those scales that we actually need to get to. We're going to progressively elaborate. Once we get to those scales, we're going to use them. Okay? We're okay. So I'm going to keep on moving. I want to talk about risk attitude quickly again.
Levels.
I'm just saying that we get to risk attitude, that a good organization has defined, has actually taken the time to do some homework. So they're defined and they're measured of what success means and what it means to get there. So the guy on the left, he's probably measured the wind speed and everything. I don't mean to be ridiculous here. And he's been practicing jumps offline here, and he's pretty certain he can make that jump between that one rock to the other. Risk is he falls in between. He could probably fall a long way, bust both legs. Maybe he'll lay there until he dies because nobody will ever see him. But he's pretty cool. He's going to try it, and he's going to make it. That guy's going to make it. The guy on the right, though, didn't do his homework at all. He's just going to stick his hand in that alligator's mouth, and predictably, we know what's going to happen here. He's a risk taker, but you know what? How do I know this guy doesn't do this professionally? So he's maybe working with an alligator he's worked with before, or he knows how to when to catch him. One of the secrets that I know that they use here is that they catch them early in the morning. That's a reptile. So reptiles are cold-blooded. So this is part of the secret to when you see these kind of shows, is that they're catching them while they're still cold-blooded. The alligator or crocodile hasn't really warmed up completely yet. I'm not saying he can't bite you, but I'm saying that down on the probability scale, while he's still warming up, while his blood's still cold, he's less likely to be aggressive. These guys know that. They can sense that. They're pros. They've been doing this. That's kind of the magician's trick here. All right? So let's move on. That you need to be aware of within your own organization, risk aversion and risk taking, right? So your organization is like, it could be, and then again, I like to give you the wild ends of a spectrum, because it shows you the point and almost silly, but it makes it the right way for you. So if you look on the left, you see a helicopter parent. This mom, she's wrapping her kid up in bubble wrap before he even sends him to school, thinking nothing can happen to him. I got news for you. This is the kid that everything's going to happen to, all right? And this is the kid, when I was a kid, I'm taking this kid's lunch money from him every day. Hey, kid, come here. Give me that lunch money. Because he's wrapped in bubble wrap, all right? I mean, I got to pick on him, right? But for the metaphor here, we're overprotective. So we might be on the left, we might be a button-down law firm that doesn't take much risk at all unless I can show statistically that at least a 70 or 75% probability of success here. They're willing to take that risk if it's 3 out of 4. Not much of a risk taker, is it? But they will take, but it's not 100%. So they do take some risk, not a whole lot. On the right here, he's a risk taker, right? And he's like one of those guys, the proverbial going over the falls in a barrel kind of guy. I've worked with and for guys like this many times in my career. They're fast movers, and they're of the mindset that high risk, high reward. I'm with them in that context, that as long as they've done their homework, I'll go with guys like this that are taking calculated risks, all right? I don't want to be the project manager of the USS Titanic, all right? I'm sorry. But these guys here sometimes, I've learned some of my very best business lessons from guys like this. Again, it's expert or you temper it, right? That really there's elements of both sides of these that make sense, right? You need to identify the line. So when we get to the dot ones and we're putting the plan together, and I'm saying that we're hurting our cats, this is what we're trying to do. We want to get to honest and realistic values for those scales. So they can't just say, well, that's pretty bad, and that's even really, really bad. We're not in kindergarten here. We need to come up with scales that say that constitutes a medium impact. That constitutes high probability, whatever, so that we have real scales, all right, to measure our risks against. This is what you're doing. And then, so in the dot 1, you're setting all these rules. In the dot 2, 3, and 4, you're moving on. You're you're getting everyone together to come up with these scales and to go through these processes based on the fences you're putting around. So now you're moving away from the funnel, and now you're into the fences, when it's really what a dot 1 does, all right, for you, is put the fences around. We're doing things like the known risk and the unknown risks. I say this again because the known unknowns and the known unknowns and the unknown unknowns, you'll need to know. You'll see that phrase in the exam and know what it's for and why, right? It's a risk management structure tied to reserve analysis. Known unknowns were risks that we identified. Unknown unknowns were those risks, of course, that came out of nowhere, that no one really should have been able to identify ahead of time. Some kind of economic market shift that happened well after we planned the project, that no longer are we basing on the dollar, we're basing it on the llamas, on the drachma, and whatever. But these are things that are unknown, okay? And that's where the management reserves kick in.
Hey, Clark?
Yes.
Can you look at risks also besides, thinking of the real world picture of like currency and maybe culture and all that kind of stuff too? Maybe the risk of the dollar went from $1 to a peso or something. I'm just making, our pound went to a yen. You know, a different currency all of a sudden on the government structure.
And
I'm
absolutely,
just,
and absolutely you'll do that. Okay. You're going to see that here in risk management, we have two levels. We do a qualitative, I'm going to show you, and a quantitative. And quantitative is about what you're talking about there. And really you'll do quantitative for a lot of reasons. One, because there's a lot of risk in your project. It's either high cap. And the other reason is that there might be it's a long-term project. So the time value of money that we're going to talk about tonight is just what you talked about, the fluctuations in the value of currency and the value of money over time needs to be figured into risk. And yes, I would do that there. I also want to point out here on this screen that there are negative risks. Again, I've already mentioned this, that we want to be, we don't want to just be cognizant of the bad things that can happen and try. That's not what risk means. That there's also positive risk, that there's opportunities out there. That as we evaluate looking at risk, we're looking at what we really mean is we're trying to look at future events. They could be good events, they could be bad events, positive and negative. We're looking at both so that we can formulate strategies for it. That's really what I like about PMBOK, because not every one of the methodologies I see out there considers risk from both sides of the ball. Don't know why they don't, but this one does, and I'm very happy about that it does. Many times you're at that where it's risk aversion. Risk is not necessarily a bad thing. It's not. Just like greed's not a bad thing. It's a force that if you push it in a high voltage or fire, or it's a force used correctly, it's a strong thing. It just depends on how you look at it. Sometimes it just has a bad connotation to it. Risk has to be looked at in both negative and positive veins, okay? And here, again, you're setting it against, because you really have to come up with some sort of baseline, some sort of living baseline. So you're going to be looking for that risk appetite. One of the things that are going to help you manage the project after you've established that risk appetite, generally what's risky. And you've done that in a couple of ways, because you've made your stakeholders quantify what risk means to them through making them give you those scales. First, they identified risks, so you made them do that. Then you made them do the scales. So they've pretty much kind of given you that baseline. You also have the risk register, which is that living document to refer to. What is the status of risks at any given time through the project? Okay. So, and you're deciding all of this in your dot ones. So like I said to you many times before, and I'm going to say it to you again, dot ones are your friends. We as project managers like to put controls in. And we like to put controls in that we don't have to argue later about. Project management is not about whip cracking. If there's already a rule in place, then we've won the argument before it's already happened, right? This is a good thing. So not only so that we avoid agita, but we want to make the project go in a logical sense. Particularly when we talk about risk management, we're driving it here. See what we've done top down? We're driving a process. So we want to put controls in that make sense to the project, that makes sense for metrics, for measurement standpoints, things we like. They're good controls. Probability, impact, and urgency. Okay. So again, here, thinking like we do in a good knowledge area. Funnel, fence, bite size. Okay. Just like this. So let's move forward, and we're basing it on that breakdown structure so we don't miss anything. Risks can be broken down, identified, and through decomposition. It's a great tool. I love it because it's used time and time again through their methodology. They relate to each other, so I'm not really wasting work. If I'm doing work in a risk breakdown structure, man, I'm actually doing some work that I'm going to be able to use in my resource breakdown structure and my work breakdown structure, because I'm building them all simultaneously. I'm not wasting work. I'm not wasting time. And I'm not really being caught by surprise, because risk is telling me things I need to know over in time, and et cetera, et cetera. Quality. I'm doing a really good project management thing here. So in the dot one, we'll just drive right through this, because I try to explain to you what we're doing here in the dot one is we've got to set those rules, those metrics. Here, like we did in cost management, the power is in setting those values, all right, that can be measured. It's in, it's not, all right? So here's where we want to do this in the dot one rules, here for risk. so that we have real measurements. We look at the inputs, the project management plan, meaning any given time, the project charter, the direct input to risk management, if you've noticed, stakeholder, because it's really, it's a constraint. It's at the level of a constraint. So the charter, which is a direct input to risk management. So it's telling us that the next, and take a look at those two documents, the charter and the stakeholder register. It says all the way back to our initiation process, right? Those two documents are going to be direct inputs into our risk management process. Our stakeholders are going to tell us risk is basically what they tell us risk is and how it should be handled. And once we're in there, yakety yak, it's up to them. So that's why they're involved very early and in early conversations. Here, maybe Jill, for example, when I talk about EES and OPAs, many things are already decided for you. You know, you don't get to just make decisions early in big companies. They're already decided for you how things are done. So you're kind of that, you need to be aware of that. And they have risk management strategies and templates and things that they've already done based on many, so especially J&J, highly as regulated as they are. They're much deeper than anything I'm teaching here. But if we go to the tools and technique, but the point is, it's all the same, is that we're trying to drive it top down, like we've done all the way through so far at this point. The analytical techniques that I'm showing you here for planning risk management are talking about trying to herd those cats. It's about moving criteria, deciding what's criteria, just putting fences around those criteria, so giving them values. Those are the analytical techniques. Starts with define, and then we refine. And so on the exam, they really don't call out individual techniques more than, except for these for P&I assessments, for the probability impact matrix. But you know that we're analyzing our risks in a whole lot of ways. Expert judgment, mainly here is our stakeholders, endless meetings, and the output is that risk management plan, as detailed as we possibly can, and we're constantly growing it. But really, we want to zone in on ranges that we can use, that lines in the sand to help us manage. So let's look at the elements of a good risk management plan. Just like the elements of any good dot one, we want to define the risk appetite, because we're trying to come up with a baseline like we did in the first, when I did in time, cost, and where there's official baselines. Here we need something. We take it in execution. So risk appetite and that risk register is how we're going to do it. We define the meaning of probability and impact as it applies to project risk prioritization, and how we decide what risks need contingency planning. So where we're going with this, what I mean by this is, once we've decided on scales, once we've established scales, we're going to do priority, and we're going to plop in each risk and see where it fits in that matrix. And if it fits in anywhere that's a high probability or high impact, we're probably going to write a plan for it. So for the exam, know that we write contingency plans for high risk plans, and you get to be high risk because that's where you finished in the matrix, up in those high end corners. Okay, we're going to need a plan for how do we changing risk appetites, and how do we deal with that. Okay, and those reporting formats of risk. We're going to dashboard as many things as we can, and we're going to talk about things like that in our communications plan. But when we talk about stakeholders, communications plan is really where we're going with this. How do we keep these meetings moving forward? How do we keep our, back particularly early in the herding cats phase? Risk is only one. How do we come up with our quality requirements? We have to get people to finally come to a consensus. That's our job. Okay, so we're going to do that through a communications plan that kind of compels things to keep moving forward. All right. There's that breaks down structure here with one of our key tools. So we're going to use that to identify our risks again. So and here's where we're looking for areas to identify risks. So we're looking at all these areas here. And again, do you want to memorize all these ITTOs? I don't. But as I look, I see this is pretty much the whole rest of the subsidiary plans without looking at them, that risk can manifest itself just about anywhere, right, within the project. So I need to look at risk in a 360-degree view. and I have to look at it within the context of the environment that I'm working in. But if you look at it, this is where I'm getting a lot. I can really get a lot of, and it's progressive elaboration. So we're running through these identify risk process time and time again. But we're doing this through documentation reviews, because we're not just, again, we're progressively elaborating our own documents, but we're looking at a lot of historical data, and we're looking at industry data and things like that. We're using information gathering techniques, because what we're trying to do here is we're trying to drive top down. So remember, we start with a brainstorming and an affinity diagram. So we're creating categories, big categories of risks, and then we're going to decompose from there. So we're using pretty much the same techniques of where we had, interviews and focus groups and things like that first got us, that gathered all the identified those risks and put them into categories. Then we use techniques for consensus building to actually quantify those. We identified in a funnel, we used fences to quantify. So checklists are great, assumption analysis, diagramming techniques, and what I mean by those, and I'm going to refer to logical relationships. Much as I did when we talked about in schedule, there are logical relationships that the relationship of, if a one risk event happens, it may have an effect on downstream of it. So we're going to be talking about trigger events, and we're going to be talking about collateral damage and things like that. And you diagram these out, you actually draw them out. It will help you to identify that if a risk happens, that what else happens. When that just not that risk, but what else does it affect downstream, all right? SWOT analysis, we're MBAs here, so we know that we're talking about strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, with internally and externally for risks. SWOT analysis is a good tool because it makes us look at our organization in a stark view, so that we're not full of ourselves. Really have to look at ourselves in a true light, okay? And of course, expert judgment driving all of it. The output of identifying risks is a lot what we've done before. It's a risk register. We identified stakeholders, right? Identify, what are we doing? We're going to build lists. So here we're starting with a risk register, and you can imagine it's not just a list of risks, but we're going to have attributes of those risks, okay? We're going to talk about their probabilities and impacts of those risks. So as we accumulate the attributes through progressive elaboration, the things that we're going to need to know about our risks as we plan them and monitor them for execution, we're going to build them here in the risk register. And this is what I mean, that this is going to belong to somebody. Probably best thing to do on big projects is to split the list up and give blocks of risks to each of your team members and make them own it. Whenever you come, I learned that in the Navy, that as long as someone is accountable for something, it tends to get done. Like I said, I'm not talking about whip cracking here, but accountability is something that if something falls between the cracks, you can almost look back and say, well, how did that happen? Well, it really wasn't any one specific job to have that done. Many times that's the case. So to make sure that risks actually get monitored, you assign them in a custodianship fashion, because we want risks to be watched. Risks change state. Sometimes there are low risks, that now because of the changing landscape, are becoming a medium risk, or even all the way up to high risk. Maybe we're also looking for, like I told you, those logical relationships. We're looking for precursors, perhaps. That's that little tremor that happens before the big one. So we're looking for what are called trigger events. So here you see the word trigger when you talk about risks. It's something that tells us that something's coming ahead of time. Good risk management is looking at trigger events, all right, as well as collateral damage. This is what I mean by those logical upstream, downstream logical relationships when we diagram out risks. The risk register is a living, breathing constantly growing document that is really our baseline at any given time. So if I was to say, and there's no such thing as a risk baseline on the exam, but there is in the real world, that I need something, and that's pretty much it. If I need a tool to point to, it's the risk register, as well as a few other things, but that's really a line in the sand, right? Is where are we, what state are we with our risks at any given time, any given moment. So to identify our risks, we're using a breakdown structure just so we can start with the top and work our way down. Identifying big pockets of risks and then decomposing from there. Creating a risk register because we're documenting the risks that we come up with. And we're also coming up with those risk relationships, those logical relationships. And a list of potential risk responses is always ongoing. You don't get a little ahead of yourself because these responses are created in 11.5. What I mean by responses, for the exam, you have to know that we're going to create plan Bs for the high risk stuff. So here we're constantly reviewing and looking back at our list of risks. So it's constantly growing, okay, and changing. Remember, our second level is categories. So much like we've done before, we're coming up where we're mapping our risk breakdown structure over to our work breakdown structure, and as well as other breakdown structures like resources where a lot of risk can come from. We can look at it in the view of across project life cycle. So from a time standpoint, here we're looking at, like you said, Aubrey, we're looking at the effective time and change of cycle here. How does that impact risk? And then we might want to look at it also across project phases as we're looking at, so from some particular project, the project phase, when we go from design to testing, or we increase coming up with new risks? Did we retire risks? Are we in another world of risk? Et cetera, okay? So we're looking at risks horizontally, vertically, in different ways through progressive elaboration across time. Big projects, we're doing this quite deeply. Smaller projects, well, come on, let's get going. We are looking at least, if nothing else, we're looking at our risks, and we've done so where we're not going to get caught with a left hook on something large, on something that's going to be a big impact that we didn't even consider. At least we've done that. And when we look at things from risk management, it's also kicking us back into an area that's making us think that if we can come up with why is something risky, and then start to work our way back, root cause. I haven't showed you the quality tools yet. Ishikawa, for example. If you work your way back from a problem statement and what could have caused the problem, we're going to try to find what root cause is, not the symptoms, not what we see happening, but what's making it happen. And if we get lucky and we fix a root cause, perhaps we've just made many other things less risky. Maybe we've made scheduling easier. The old 80-20 rule, the old Pareto chart thing, I'll also show you when we get to quality management, but getting down to the root cause is a really good thing because it makes you think all the way down to what could be causing the problem, and you could be fixing a lot of things ahead of time, really making it really stay on a good path all the way across. These urgency reviews are important because, like I said, urgency is a catalyst. And so if you have urgency, you really have to factor it into your decisions about, particularly in strategies, all right, you have to make a decision here. So what's the best decision for us, all right? And these urgency reviews help us gauge that urgency. Maybe we're not there yet. We still have another week yet where we can, maybe something will happen. So we don't have to make a decision until we have to make a decision. And we did that through our urgency reviews. Key output is the risk register updates. To really know that for the exam, that the risk register, and we're constantly adding fields. Constantly adding columns and rows. The rows are identified risks, right? The columns being attributes. That, necessary bits of data about each one of the risks that we need to know to plan and to monitor, okay? So that risk register is going to be that living document for us, all right? Based on that risk breakdown structure that we don't miss. There's that risk breakdown structure. I'm sorry, the risk register. A list of living list of project risks, the attributes, those trigger events, so those logical relationships, responsible parties for those risks, etc. And those risk relationships that I was talking about, upstream, downstream type of risk, collateral damage type of risk things. And those lists of ongoing potential risk responses. Just an Excel spreadsheet, but it's a powerful document that tells us a lot about what we want to know. We've built this document from scratch. Unless we come from J&J, then they told us what to do. But assuming for the exam now that we did have to build this thing from scratch, this is what we're doing. Start with a simple spreadsheet, and we build it and cater it to what we want. The data that we want to collect for the reasons that we want to do it. And remember, these documents, a risk register is a document that's complementary to the stakeholder register, is it not? Because as I'm asking the stakeholder, building a stakeholder register, what am I asking? Their initial requirements. I'm starting to see a lot of their pain points, things that are important to them are risky, and they have that flavor to them, right? I'm beginning to look at issues from a 360-degree standpoint early in the project, all right? And it's documents like that, a risk register, that make sure that I do, and I continue to do so. So we like registers in project management as much as we like breakdown structures, just like we like matrices to help us make decisions that I'm going to show you here, in qualitative analysis. Like I told you, there are 2 levels. We're going to quickly go through these, and then we're going to take a quick break. In fact, we may not get all the way through before we take that break. That's what I said, we might not get all the way through procurement management tonight, but I definitely am going to show you net present value. So let's look at qualitative risk analysis, much like the build, and it's built on the building blocks that we just talked about. We identified our risks and we categorized them, and we built, and we've asked our stakeholders to come up with scales of impact and probability based on each one of the risks that they identified. How probable do they think it is, and how much of an impact, and then generally what do those scales mean, right? What is a big impact? And we came to a consensus. So now we're ready to perform qualitative risk analysis based on the things that we did. So let's start with the inputs. And these are the things, again, like I said, most outputs from upstream or inputs to downstream. So there's your risk register and the risk management plan, which is always an input. The .1 is always an input to its subsequent processes. The scope baseline. Why? Because just like every good knowledge area, what are we doing? We're in the context of scope, in the context of what are we delivering. So what are we delivering? What are the risks in, and I don't mean risks that the thinking risks stops there, but certainly time, cost, and scope did, right? When we started to consider coming up with the baseline, and that's what we're doing here, is trying to baseline. Eventually, is the input, as they having enough information come out of risk management so that we can finally baseline our project, right? That's where we're going with this. So the scope baseline, and of course the factors about who we're doing it for. Risk P&I assessments. I'm going to show you that's those matrices. For the exam, you need to know X axis versus Y axis. Okay, there they are, and the assessments thereof. So we're going to look at risks individually, and we're going to look at them collectively. It's going to be a long, tedious process, but I'm going to show you 1 or 2 little things. They're repetitive, so you do them once, you do them over and over again. These are the questions they're going to ask you on the exam. Risk data quality assessment is what it sounds like. That just like anything that we do, we really want to make sure we're doing it based on good quality data. So we're always looking at our risk data. And I've always said one of the Clark rules is that you'd like to try to get the same data from 2 or 3 credible sources so that you really know it's credible, right? Same thing, and that's how you check on your experts. But that's what that means. And it's an ongoing process. Risk categorization, like I said, it's breaking it down. So from the top level, we start, and that's really a level 2 decision here. So we're talking about coming up with categories of risk, and then further decomposing those categories down into the individual risks so I can rate them and prioritize them as a low risk, medium risk, or a high risk. And then what do I do about it? That's where I'm going. Urgency is definitely an input, and then my expert judgment. My outputs, or I'm sorry, was the output is those project document updates, which is really the effect of project of progressive elaboration. So what I'm doing here in qualitative analysis is by now I'm ready to go. I'm ready to put my P&I matrices together and rate my risks. I'm ready to go now. Okay, so let's take a look at qualitative in action. Qualitative analysis is this. All right. This is a simple P&I matrix. All right. One probability is this axis, impact of this axis. Okay. As you can see, both are scales. Right now, the impact scale is still nebulous, but it's something, right? And so, and in a minute here, that's what I'm going to. That's the course of action that I'm going to suggest to you. That if you haven't got there with risk management, this is a good way to start to kind of drive, particularly when it comes to impact. I need real scales. A probability scale maybe could be broke down into percentages, all right, that a 10% chance, 20% chance, et cetera, et cetera. This one we come to easier than this one. And when we talk about impact, we really have to put real measurable when it comes to the impact. So that's the more important one and the tougher for you to quantify, but you have. So in this case, I would say to you, that's where you're going with this one. I want to show you a simple example, only because for the test, as you can see, here's what happens. So as we plop risks in, let's say we plop a risk in that we said that it's a high probability of it happening. 80, it's a high probability. It's also a high probability, a high risk of it if it happens. So it's way up here in the red. These extreme high risks and these high risks, I'm going to write a plan for. If they happen, and it looks like they are, because they're also high probability, are they not? So now I really should be ready for them. I should be ready for them. Okay, that they have a high, and so I should have a plan ready, good or bad. Remember, these risks can be threats or opportunities. For the exam, I am writing plans for high risk. For those medium risks, the yellow risks, I'm putting them on a watch list and I'm monitoring them for the upgrades. So in the test, you're monitoring them and you're calling them out. You're actually, they may ask you a question about it. Staff meeting, you're asking about those because a medium risk could quickly become a high risk. So we are monitoring those for changing risk patterns, all right? And the triggers and that would make it turn into, that's important for the exam. For the exam, the low risks, those that we came down here, the greens that are low probability, they're very low probability of happening. And even if they do happen, they have a low impact. We're not going to write a plan for those. We're really only going to put them on a watch list and keep a review. Those could turn from low to mediums. So you might see a question like that on the exam. But it's really, they're going to ask you about if they're asking about monitoring, they're really talking about the medium ones. If they mean trigger events and the logical relationships so that you're looking for downstream, because that's where they want you to really do the on the fly, you're on your feet managing. At any given time, I'm watching my risk register to see what's going on. So that's really what they want you to look at. So that if something becomes a high risk, you write a plan for it. So guaranteed drop dead for the exam. It's a high risk, you write a plan for it. It's medium risk, it's on a watch list and you're monitoring it, okay? And that's probably where you're going to see your monitoring questions. For medium risk, that could become high risks. If they do, you write a plan for them. Low risks, and they're based on where they landed the matrix, that low probability, low impact. I'm going to leave on a watch list and I won't write a plan for it. If I look at this again from a strategy standpoint, I start here. You see the probability, even the probability and impact is still kind of nebulous. So if I'm just starting this for the first time, I still need to try to put fences around what does it mean, the insignificant margin. So at least from standpoint that our first couple of passes through, we identified our risks. So think about where we're at. We identified our risks and we categorized them. I am now asking my stakeholders to tell me probability and impact. Clark, I never thought about this before. Fine. Let's start thinking about this and decomposing type of way. We can start with categories like insignificant, marginal, moderate, work our way up, and start to, as you can see, I'm beginning to really decide what does that mean. So that the next time through, as I'm building consensus, maybe I can actually put scales to it. That's where I want to get to, are real scales that say I'm no longer in this category, I'm no longer in the very unlikely, I'm in the unlikely, which changes my strategy. Do you understand what I mean? Funnels and fences. So I am funneling my way down and I'm herding cats. I start by identifying and categorizing, but then I need to get to consensus. So some of the information technique, gathering techniques change to more consensus building techniques so that I can get to X and Y formats that make sense. I can plop in and drop in as I look at each identified risk. I can see where does it end up here in the matrix, and I can decide it's a low risk. It ended up right here. Okay, that it was very unlikely and it was moderate. I'm not going to write a plan for that according to P. I'm not going to write a plan for it. And I got yes, sir.
Are they going to kind of give us this graph or something on the test, or no? Do you think?
They may and ask you to identify a high risk, and so you will. A high risk is in the high probabilities, and high impacts, and you're going to and they'll give it to you in color, just like this, if they give you one, or it's going to be, or in the box it's going to say high, or something that tells you. Or within the question, it's going to give you the scale. And you're going to figure out, yep, that landed in high. Somehow you're going to be able to answer that question. You're right. You could see it as just a paragraph. You might see it as a scale here. Okay? But this is really the heart of risk management, is getting to, from a qualitative standpoint, it's getting to these P&I matrices and those scales to where they make sense, so that you can really decide what gets a plan written for it and what doesn't. Okay? Now, those tools and techniques, I want to remind you once again that I point to this in PMBOK that, hold on, what time is it? I'm going to show you this table. We're going to take a little break. And we're going to, I guess we'll get through net present value, and that's where we'll stop tonight. I'm sorry.
Okay.
That's okay. That's okay. We have 4 more sessions yet. I want it to be a little slower, but again, I want to point this out. This is right out of PMBOK and it's right out of Clark. All right, that risk needs to be looked at from both sides of the coin. So as you can see, the matrices are mirror images of each other. High risk on this side means good. High, yay! Even though, so I'm going to write plans that enhance the probability of this happening. I'm going to show you those. We're going to come up with those strategies. I'm going to show them to you in a moment here. Okay? And those risk register updates and assumption updates. So we perform qualitative risk analysis. And again, I wouldn't touch on, these are the things I just talked about. Doing those P&I assessments and then coming up with your plans, okay? So this is what we're doing. We're performing qualitative risk analysis, and the outputs are our results of where we're ready to where we have rated risks with plans ready to go. We can go into further analysis, which would be quantitative, and we're going to show you that here. So quantitative takes it a little bit further, all right? Takes it a little further than just P&I analysis. See, qualitative was based on criteria. Even though it was measurable, still qualitative, right? Here, we're actually going to be doing, we're going to do distributions. We're going to do cumulative distributions, beta and triangular over time. We're going to do more of a statistical analysis, and we do because, for a couple of reasons. We don't do quantitative analysis on every project, Aubrey. We do this for big projects because in big projects, even small swings have big dollar sense impacts. So it makes sense to do deeper statistical analysis. On the exam, you might see a question that that even on smaller projects, the higher rate of risk, those that we decided were red risks back in P&I, those are the ones that would move on to quantitative. So the 5 or 10 or whatever in a small project. So in the exam, you might see a question like that. That one of the conditions that you might use quantitative analysis is the higher risks that you're identified in qualitative. Another one is that we're just using a big project in the first place. That it's a big project. And I'm going to show you the power of that in the next couple screens. All right, its impact is assessing project risk on the project as a whole, and then an organization of PMO level risk. So it's tied to even bigger strategy, quantitative analysis, because it's looking at it's also looking at resource allocation and risk as it runs up the chain. Okay, so it has its inputs to bigger risk processes higher up the chain. Tools and techniques are data gathering techniques. I wanted to show you it in action here, and then we're going to take a quick break. When we talk about quantitative, here's some of our estimates that we got, raw estimates that we got from our folks, and you can see it's a big project, so it's in the tens of millions of dollars. And here we identified areas of risk, big areas of risk, ranges of cost estimates. So estimates on design, estimate and build, and estimate and test. How close are we? How good are we with these cost estimates? Right? We really should do a qualitative analysis, because here's the low, high, and low, medium, and high, all the way down to the total project. And I want you to remember here that here's our estimates. That our low estimate is 31, a high of 68, our most likely a 41. Quite a good size range here. Certainly worthy at this kind of money and those kind of range to perform quantitative analysis. So let's take a look at, remember our most likely down the bottom was 41 million. It was not a very good estimate, was it? Because if we subject that same data set to a cumulative range here and a simple triangular, and that we haven't even done fancy stuff here yet. All we did was take that bottom data set of 31, 41, and 68, and came up with the mean. And the mean is more like 46.67. So the mean is more like 47 million, not 41 million. Rated against a probability scale, our original 41 million only really has a 12% chance of actually coming in. So it's a good thing we did quantitative analysis here, because our range was so sloppy, and that it was the probability of it really being a true answer was not very high. We did a cumulative. We could see what we did, right? All we did was take that data set, establish a mean, which is more like 47 million, closer to 47 million, and put it up against the probability rate, a probability scale of 0 to 100, and just cross matrix and said, where does 41 lie here? Only 12%. So if we really were looking for a 75%, which makes us happy, a 75%, we should have a total project budget cost baseline somewhere more like 50 million. Now, before I move on, did you see this, Aubrey?
Yes, I did.
Okay, and it was we did this based on a simple triangular, simple average of our
right.
Of our very sloppy estimates. So we did quantitative analysis, and really look what it did for us. Okay, it really it's going to save us. So what it shows us here, if you look down here, is you might see this formula is where we're going to have to come up with a contingency. So we look at the original estimate of 41 million, and where our quantitative is telling us a 50 million, saying that we really need to put in our contingency at 22%. That formula is that the new calculation based on the mean 50 minus the 41 divided by the 41 comes up with a 22%. Okay, that's how we got there. And we come up with the 75% is correct, because in this example, that's what we would like to do. So if we see a 75%, we're going to go ahead with this project. So this might be a place where we kill a project, right? We've talked about killing projects. We might not even get this one started because we, in our risk management, we're seeing already it's too risky. It's just too risky. Okay, it's too risky of a project, and we're not going to do it in the first place. So we're not going to move on. This project will be terminated. All right. I'm looking at this one, and we're already, um, our ranges are too high. It seems to me we really don't know what we're doing here. But these probability distributions, sensitivity analysis, I want to show you a tornado diagram. So what I'm showing you here is that there's a way now that we've identified each and every risk. And I just showed you that the overall risk of a project, it can be pretty high just from the last diagram I showed you because of the sloppiness between the estimates were pretty sloppy, weren't they? So that those estimates represent a range of uncertainty. Back to uncertainty again for risk, okay? And here's what we're showing is that individually, if I look at individual risks, my ranges are sloppy because my uncertainty is sloppy. And this tornado diagram shows you from top to bottom based on a range of uncertainty. So it also shows you the mean point that the effective negative risk and positive risk of each risk. So at this point, I'm going to use this tornado diagram to help me reduce uncertainty. I may look at risk 1 and try to reduce the uncertainty so that I can take advantage of all this positive effect that I might get. It's just a tool. You don't have to know about it, Aubrey and Jill, but you have to recognize a tornado diagram when you see it, and what it does. It shows you each risk and its spread of uncertainty. So you use it as a tool to help you try to identify the big pockets of uncertainty, and if you can reduce uncertainty, you reduce risk individually as well as collectively. Now we run the numbers, and maybe we'll do the project. A minute ago we weren't. Now maybe we were. We will. Okay. And then there's this last one. I want to talk about. Maybe we should take a break now because I'm getting a little tired here, and it is 7:15.
Yeah, let's take a break.
That's 10 minutes to 8. I'm sorry, man. Let's take a break now. We'll call it 10 minutes. We'll call it 8 o'clock, and we'll go 30 minutes and no more than that. I'll show you these last couple of tools. I'll show you net present value, and we're going to be done. Okay.
I'll hold you to it. Good.
You got it, man. I'm tired too. All right, so I'm hitting the stop. And here's where we left off was this tool right here. And this is earned monetary value. All right, that's what this is, a decision tree. And all I'm saying, first thing I would warn you against is don't get the acronyms mixed up between earned monetary value, EMV, and earned value management of EVM. I don't see where they would try to trip you up, but it's like having two RBSs. Just read the question and make sure that you're answering the question. But you can see here, this is a decision tree. So what this does is it basically just kind of drives a decision based on probabilities, and so real quick, I'll go ahead and go up through this with you. So that you can understand how to use this, because you might see something like this on the exam, and they'll ask you to make a decision. And what it starts with is, let's start left to right here, okay? We have to make a decision here. Don't look at the boxes yet. Just follow me. I mean, don't look at the gray boxes yet. Follow me so that you can see that we have to make a decision about whether we build a brand new factory or do we upgrade the factory that we have, okay? In order to make that decision, we have to come to a decision node. So we'll go one back here. Something like the NCAA playoffs here, right? So we go back a bracket here to the decision node. And these are our two decisions broken. There they are. One's the build decisions, the other's the upgrade. The build decision is going to require a $120 million investment. The upgrade is only a $50 million investment. All right. So what should we do? So you go back to the chance node here. Here, we're going to decide based on the information, and then you can see here we're talking about market demand. So these are data that were given to us by our marketing folks, for example. And so we're hoping that they did a really good job here. They're the ones that told us if we build a new plant, there's a 60% chance that there's going to be a very strong demand for our product of $200 million. There's also a 40% chance that there's only a weak demand of only $90 million. All right. And now let's look at the second one, the second decision here, where we look at the upgrade. According to our folks, that if we simply upgrade our plant, there's a 60% chance that we'll have strong demand, which will equate to $120 million, or a 40% chance that there'll be weak demand, which will be only $60 million. Okay. So now we go back to the net path value, okay, which helps us make the decision. So now we're going to let the math do the drive the decision, okay? What we got here is we have $80 million. Now, $80 million is the difference between the $200 million on this note here, okay? The $200 million that we might get from strong demand minus the original investment is $80 million. There's a 60% chance of that happening, right? Here or down here, there's our weak demand, which are $120 million, which we would have to first invest. It only created $90 million. We have a negative $30 million, and there's a 40% chance of that happening. So if we take that over to here and we do the numbers at 60% of 80, the chance of 80 million plus a 40% chance of negative 30 million comes up to an EVN number of $36 million. Okay. I'm not going to go through the bottom here. I want you can do this, but you can see we did the same exact thing down the bottom, two chances for the second decision. We came up with 46 million. Like everything else I'm going to say, like in that present value, like to take the bigger number. Bigger number wins. So in this case, we are going to do an upgrade instead of building a whole new plant, because the EMV number, the earned monetary value number based on our decision tree here, said 46 to 36. So I want you to be able to see this, Aubrey, because if they give you a question on the exam on this, they're going to ask you to make a decision. They're going to ask you to go through the tree and come up with pick the right answer or something. So, and this is and it's going to be probably almost exactly like this. You know, two choices and then two possibilities for each choice so that you can get through it. This is how you do it. Okay. Before I move on from this decision tree, did you have any questions?
You want to get some problems on this weekend?
See if I can see what I can find on this. All right, I might just make up a couple and send.
Yeah, because I was glancing at this on Rita, or a couple, Rita, and this math book that I have for project management. And the math book does not have anything on this. That's why I'm asking.
Okay, I can definitely do that, and I think you're going to see a one or two questions about making decisions using decision trees. I think you will. So I'll send you something of it. And again, that's where I want to be this weekend by the end of this lecture, is where I can send you. I'm going to send you problems this weekend. I will send you guys, your earned values, maybe another network diagram or two to draw, and a little bit of net present value. And then I'll see what I can do with this too. So thanks for asking. Okay. And then there's modeling. And no problem, man. There's modeling. So I don't think there was anything about the mechanics of the tree that bothered you, right? You just want to see some practice and keep practicing at it, right?
Yes, sir. I want to keep practicing on it.
Okay, good. Okay, good. So we'll talk about the outputs of quantitative analysis. Remember, so we did a qualitative, and the key there was the P&I matrices here. The probability distributions, right, is the key here. So we get to see big picture of the quantitative. Probability of achieving times and goals. Prioritize list of quantified risks. So this is giving us the biggest threats and opportunities, maybe even in a better sense. Like I said, that, on the test, they may ask you, okay, where else would the big risks, even on a small project, would go through quantitative analysis. For the exam, answer it that way, okay? And then there are trends, because unlike qualitative analysis and quantitative analysis, I'm not only just looking at data, but I'm looking at it over time. So if I look at data over time, I can see patterns, I can see trends, and that helps me, particularly if I'm doing long-term planning and I'm looking into the future. It's great to see if I can help predicting the future is looking at past patterns and trends that continually repeat themselves over and over again. So you look like you're looking at a crystal ball, but you really didn't. You've identified a trend and a pattern that happens every time, and you're just going to take advantage of it. Okay. Planning the risk responses, all right? I want you to, let's go through that, and then we're going to hit NPV, and we'll be done. This is what you're going to need to know for the exam. I know I told you when you're planning risk responses, for the test, they want you to, they're going to zero in that you understand that you're going to write contingency plans for the high risks that you, like I said, you're going to monitor the medium risks for for trigger events, collateral damage, et cetera, and for it moving up and down in the scale, and that you're going to have the low risks on a watch list, and you're going to watch that low risk. Okay. Once you've prioritized, once you've you need to come up with strategies. Once you've decided what are high risks and low risks, you need to come up with strategies for them, right? So those plan Bs would be the implementations of those strategies to either avoid or enhance or whatever. So I'm going to show you those that you need to know for the exam. But like I said, I'm giving you what you need to know for about risk responses for the test, all right? That, for high risks. Plan Bs, craft them to either enhance opportunities or reduce risk. Why? Because these are the risks that through P&I we identified as up in the upper scales, right? The ones that we're going to write plans for. Okay, they use the contingency plan are written for high risk and sometimes for medium risks. Sometimes for the exam, if they drop dead, it's the high risks. Okay, so that's what they want you to. That's going to answer your question. Plan calls for additional resources and funding. So there may be some. This is tied to management reserves as well. So the bigger picture of risk management. All right, and be careful to identify secondary risks, so collateral damage and address their impacts. Same as we did with when we were looking at dependencies and scheduling. Okay, we don't want to miss any. All right, and because if we do, we're going to forget work getting done, and that kind of we'll miss risks happening that cause further damage down the line that we didn't think of. It's not a good thing. All right. Here's where PMBOK assigns that risk owner. And this is what I mean by risk owner. You'll probably see that on the exam. What does risk owner mean? It's the person that I put in charge of the list of the risk register or pieces of the risk register, right? The risk owner. I want to assign an owner to each risk. I'd like it to also be a secondary owner, and this is me talking, is the stakeholder itself that either identified the risk or the risk is going to have an impact on, because they got skin in the game, right? Those, I always found that if it personally impacts people, that's the other thing. So if something can be accounted for, it tends to get done. But it's also if something impacts somebody, it tends to get done well. Okay, so I look for risk owners, all right, and identify trigger events to try to stay ahead of things. I almost look like a swami here. All right. Now, these are the strategies you need to know for the exam. So it's a good screen to study from, but it's right out of PMBOK, okay? First, let's talk about the strategies for negative threats. So like I said, you got both sides of the coin, right? So we're looking at risk, and we identified these are the bad things that could happen, all right? So and we identify where they're at via P&I. So we're going to formulate strategies. We're not getting too deep. You just need to know the 4 main strategies. This is for for the test. First one's avoid, all right? Where you do everything, not doing I'm going to try everything I can to avoid. It makes every bit of sense that it's a bad event, and if I can avoid it from happening, I'm going to do so. That's one of my strategies. Another one is transfer. Transfer means that I've now transferred the risk, and a great example that's insurance or bonding or transfer by contract. I'm not going to get there tonight, but when we start on Monday with procurement management, I want you to see that it's also part of a risk management strategy, is that I can transfer risk to my subcontractors. In construction, that could be big, that delays turn into big dollar liquidated damages. If my subcontractor is part of the delay, I want him to feel some of my pain. So I make him share LDs. That's me transferring some risk by contract, as an example. I will get there on Monday. Mitigate is the third strategy, where I'm trying to make it a glancing blow. I can't completely avoid it, but I can create circumstances where it's not going to be a head-on collision, right? So I can mitigate. I can soften the blow by reducing its probability of occurrence. That's one of the things that I can do is reduce its probability. How did I do that? There may be a bunch of factors. There may be other things because I moved the schedule around it. I made it less risky. So a lot of things. You don't need to know all that for the test. What you need to know is that this is one of the 4 strategies that I'm going to try to make it a glancing blow. That's what mitigate means. And then the 4th one is just simply accept it. And this is a strategy that's generally applied to the low risks. I'm not going to do anything about it. If it happens, it happens. Even medium risks, that because to plan a strategy and have everything for it is more trouble than it's worth even. I'll just, if it happens, it happens. That's what accept strategy means, okay? So here's your 4 general strategies for negative threats, all right? Avoid, transfer, mitigate, and accept. Now on the positive side, you have 4 strategies. And remember, we're thinking in terms of positive opportunities. So the first one is we're not trying to avoid it. We'd like to exploit it. You know, it's a tough word in today's world, exploit. I don't care. It's a good word. It certainly means what it means. It means take full advantage. So we're going to plan to make it happen. We are. We're going to plan to make it happen if we can, because we want it to happen. And one of the good examples that I gave you was buying and storing our materials for February in December because of the good pricing. Okay? So it's a good strategy, and nobody got hurt, and that's a good example. The second strategy is to enhance. So we can't be sure we can make it happen, but we can enhance the probability that it will happen. So we can create strategy that makes circumstances more likely that the positive thing will happen. Can't guarantee it will, but we're making it more likely all the time by the things that we're doing because we want it to happen that way. Okay? So enhance is the second strategy. Third one is share. And what I mean by share is that this is much like the Reese's peanut butter cup, right? That I say, you know, well, you got chocolate on my peanut butter, I got peanut butter and you got chocolate. Between the two of us, we have a world famous candy bar, right? Shares a good example is that we're 2 different companies that have 2 different skill sets. Neither of us individually can really approach an opportunity in full, but together our combined skill sets we can. So we might form a joint venture partnership and share the opportunity. And that doesn't mean we have to be a company or something. We could be on an individual risk opportunity. So I may be sharing this with my vendor, and I'm going to show you a contract type where we're going to share risk with our vendor to try to entice him to either stay on schedule and be better, to incentivize him, but also share risk maybe if there's overruns because we gave him a sloppier scope. We'll show you that when we get to contracts on Monday. But sharing an opportunity to make it happen is the third. And the fourth one is just like the last fourth one, accept. That if it happens, it happens. That we're not going to do anything to make it happen. It's probably going to happen anyway. We're just going to accept it when it does happen. Maybe it's a high probability, low impact. So we know it's going to happen, and it's only going to be minimal anyway. Why? So we're not going to write a plan for it, okay? These are the 4 strategies, both for negative and for positive, you need to know for the exam. So before I move on, you're going to see questions for them. You're probably going to have to name these in some way or through the question or something. Pick this strategy. Is this the right strategy? They're going to ask you questions from these 4 for negative and these 4 for positive. Aubrey, any question?
No, because the one that's positive is share or accept. Accept is the same on both.
That's right. And then the other 3 make sense to try to get away from one and to try to get close to the other, right? So
correct.
So, and we'll see that again. But again, here's your outputs. The subsidiary plan, so constant progressive elaboration, and change requests, because risk again is a living baseline. So it's change requests. But if it's going to have impact on the project, which it will for time and costs and quality, it's going to be subject. These change requests will be subject to the formal change request that you'll see when we get to execution. Okay. Again, here's that, again, the P&I. So again, the process was where we identified risks, categorized risks, created scales so we could herd our cats so that we could make these matrices, rate each one of our risks, write plans for the ones that are high risks, both negative and positive. And again, here we go. So we considered both negative and positive. All right. Now, let's go into NPV and we'll be done for the night. I just want to show you a couple of formulas because I want to send you a couple of examples or a couple of questions. NPV, which is net present value and future. So we'll start with present value, future value. I first want to start with two very simple financial payback. These are project selection formulas, so I want to show you these first. Very simple. The most simplest of all is a simple payback period, okay? This does not take into account any interest or depreciation or anything. It's a straight investment and how long till I get my money back, all right, in raw dollars. So my example here is the initial investment's $100,000, and here's your cash flows in. Year one, I'm going to see $35,000 come back in. Year two, an additional $45,000, so I'm up to $70,000. By the end of year three, I will have seen another $40,000. So, which means somewhere right in the middle of year three, I got to $100,000, right? Somewhere in year three, I got to $100,000. All right, so payback period 2.5, 2 point something like that. All right, so you do the math. Nice and simple raw dollars. Then you have internal rate of return, and this is going to be this is simply that you're looking for. Sometimes this is a figure that's set by the organization, so it says we're not going to do it if we don't see a return of at least 7.5% return or something. But the other way to look at it, when I'm looking at it in the context of, is it better than another investment? Looking at an internal rate of return, I look at these four examples, and you might see something like this on the exam. So, which of the following projects should be recommended? Well, yeah, I'm going to go right to the answer, which is select project A. Why? Because let's look at these. All right, they're from an investment, and then their monthly return as quickly as I can. A monthly return of $5,000 means I'm getting an annual return of $60,000. I'm going to see that $100,000 back before even year two is finished. That's the fastest rate of return of the four. I'm not going to do all the math here, but if you did the math on the other three, and you're going to see that those payback periods are going to be in excess of 2 years. A is the fastest rate of return, okay, of getting back that 100,000, and from that point on being in the black. So with no other information at their disposal, Alice recommends Project A. Okay. Now let's talk about the time value of money. So I want to talk about present value and future value, and then do net present value, and we are done for the evening. Okay. We have to consider the time value of money, that projects, the characteristic of projects, they start and they end, okay? Long-term projects go over exactly what they said, go over years. And that the time that it takes to do a project has economic impacts of the money that's invested has to be taken into account. So what I'm saying is that generally, the general idea is that money in hand now is worth more than money in the future. And to give you an example and I'll tell you why that is, because money in my hand now means, one, I have more, it's not invested, it's still in my hand. I have more options still with it. That's one reason why it's more valuable in my hand right now, okay? Two, it's not at risk. It's right now, it's in my hand. I haven't invested it, I'm not waiting for a return. And three, the value of money over time goes down. If you think about this, if we go all the way back to the 1930s, a $5 bill probably bought you a great night out, a great date out with, probably a steak dinner and dancing and everything for $5. Today, it probably isn't car fare to get you there. And I'm saying it's the same currency, the same United States $5 bill. It's just the value of that over time. So there's a lot of reasons why we have to take the time value of money in consideration when we do our projects, because we have to consider them from a value standpoint to the organization. So we're going to talk about, first, let's talk about present value and future value. So this is telling us we're looking at an investment, or we're looking at a project in a vacuum in and of itself. It's present value today, and we want to know what's the value of this investment is going to be down the road. Okay, we're not comparing it yet to any other investment. We're just looking at it as an investment in and of itself. So let's say the present investment is going to cost $1,500. All right, I want to know what the future value of that investment is. In order to do that, I need to know a couple things. I need to know, first off, the present value to figure future value. So that's $1,500. That's what the guy wants me to invest. I know what my discount rate is. That's going to be my going to be my the rate of compound interest rate coming back to me. In this example, I'm going to give you it's 5%, and it's going to be compounded over 3 years. So let's take a look at the formula to see what my present, if I invested $1,500 today at 5% over 3 years, what's my future value going to be? Okay. Okay. Come on, you. Come on here. Wow. Well, that took a while. Wait a second. That's not what was supposed to happen. I guess I didn't show you that. Okay, let me go to this one. Here's the net present value when we talk about, damn it, I wanted to show you that future value. Where the hell did I put that? Hold on. I want to show you this. I promise you this will not take us out of rhythm. But I can't move on without showing you.
That's fine. Take your time.
Not that one. Not that one. All right. This one. Okay. Let me show you this. This is, I don't know how I didn't put it in this PowerPoint. But let's go back to that example again. Here we go. Okay, so let's actually do the formula because that's what I didn't do for you. You have to know this formula for the exam. Okay, so the future value of this investment, all right, equals that $1,500 times 1 plus. So look at the formula telling you what we're doing here. It's 1 plus the discount rate, so it's 1 plus 0.05 because it's 5%. All right, so decimally that's 0.05 raised to the power of the number of payment periods. In this case, it's 3. I want to tell you something right now for the exam. Read the question carefully. If they say it's compounded monthly, then it's 12 times that, and there would be 36 periods over 3 years. Just read the question. They ask you if it's yearly or monthly. Okay, that's the number you're going to plug in here. For this example, it's years, so I raised it to 3 years. Okay, that takes us to this, which takes us to a future value of $1,740. So if I invest $1,500 in this little investment, 3 years from now, I take it out. It's grown to $1,740. I made $240 over 3 years. Now later, I'm going to decide whether that's a good investment or not. But right now, I'm just looking at it in and of its own self, standing on its own 2 feet. And under these circumstances, I invest $1,500 today at that discount rate for 3 years. It's going to grow to $1,740, and it proves itself in the formula you need to know moving backwards. Okay, that the present value or future value. So if I know the future value, I can figure out present value. So here we go. It proves itself backwards, right? Like most good formulas do. That if I take that 1740 and I discount it backwards now, so I'm taking my cash flows and I'm discounting them back from year 3 back to the beginning of my investment, I'm going to come right back to that original $1,500. So these two formulas complement each other. And again, it's not telling me anything about whether it's a good investment or a bad investment. All this is telling me is what it is what it is. That's what future value and present value. But it takes in consideration the time value of money right here by the discount rate. Now, in real stuff like treasury bonds and stuff, the discount rate it mirrors the inflation rate. So it's something like 2.2% or something. So it's very low. So it's really the time value of money. But in an investment, I want as much a return as I possibly can. So I'm not going to just look at this investment by itself. I'm going to look at this in context against other investments and see if it's a good investment or not. So let's go through net present value, and we're going to be done for the night. Projects are investments. That's what they really are at the portfolio level for an organization. All right, many projects have a lot of good to them, okay? We can't do them all. So we have to select. And one of the criteria we use is net present value. So if I'm comparing one project to another, the higher net present value sum was the one that you pick. That's what they're going to ask you on in the exam. So let's look at a great example here, Project A versus Project B. Okay, Project A has an initial investment of $10,000, and its cash flows have over 3 years of this: 2,000, 7,000, and 11,000. Okay, discount rate is 4.5%. I'm looking at Project B. Its initial investment is $15,000. Its cash flows are 3,500, 9,000, and 9,000 over 3 years, and its discount rate is 6%. Now I got to tell you, just by looking at it and eyeing it up, I couldn't say for sure which one was a better. Neither can you. Just by looking at it, you wouldn't swear your job on it. So no, let's do the math. So we're going to. So what I just showed you was we're looking at the future value of my present investment, right? But now I have to do it where I'm going to do it in a comparative fashion. So here's what we're going to do with net present value. So what we're going to do here is we're doing a comparative. And I want you to note here in the middle here that I want to point out to you that as you can see, our cash flows are not the same each and every year. So this you might get a very simple example on the exam that it is, so that the math works out pretty easy for you. But in the real world, it's not. You're going to have to discount back the cash flows as the real world would produce them. So you're going to need to do the calculations like I'm going to show you now, most likely. But let's look at the formula before we do the calculation. We're trying to calculate net present value. That equals the net period cash flows that we're looking at here for each one of these and times divided by, 1 plus its discount rate raised to the time periods minus its initial investment, because we need to compare, okay? So let's look at the math as it applies to Project A, all right? That it's net present value. And then look, here's the 3 years of cash flows discounted back by the number of time periods. So I have to do it year 1, year 2, year 3. Just like you see here, this is how you do it. So I take that 2,000 of year 1, discount it back for the first year. The 7,000 that I'm going to see in year 2, discounted back by year 2. The 11,000 I'm going to see here, discounted back, minus the initial investment, which is $10,000. Okay, that takes me to here, which takes me to here, which takes me to here, minus the last investment. I'm not going to, because I'm trying to get through this, I don't want to do the math for you, but I want you to see how I got to this line here. This 1913 got and 88 cents is $2,000 discounted by 1.05. Okay, this 6410 is this 7,000 discounted by 1.09. Remember, this is compound. This is this 0.05 compounded for the second year. And as you can see, the compounding rate and how it's working. And the same thing in the third, with the third number, okay, minus the initial investment. So we come up with a net present value number for Project A of $7,963.25. Let's subject Project B to exactly the same formula, right? So we can compare the two. And again, you can see what we did with the cash flows. That the discount rate is 6%, which means 0.06 in the decimal world. We had 3 years worth of cash flows at discount. So we do it like this, just like this. Okay, and here's what the figures. We're going to use the onboard calculator. There's your figures minus your minus 15,000 initial investment. There comes to this, comes to this, comes to this. So your final NPV for Project B is $3,900.63. So for the exam, you choose Project A, the higher of the two NPVs. Now, they may ask you to actually calculate it out to come to this decision, okay? And you're going to have to do exactly that. And so you'll do that. So you'll have to do a couple of quick project calculations, compare them, and pick the right one. You may see this for net present value. And this is the formula. So if there's anything that you don't understand about the formula, this here, and its application here, now's the moment to ask me, Ari.
I think I'm good. Just please do some homework pages on this if you don't mind.
Well, I will, and this
Or
and this reminds you of when they taught you finance at Keller, right? You were in your MBA class. We were talking about compounding interest forward and then discounting backwards, right?
right. I
Okay,
remember that.
and that's exactly what this is, because project selection is an investment selection. This might as well be a stock or something. We're picking the one that has the most value because we only have so many people, we have so much resources. When we pick at the portfolio level, way up at there, we're going to pick the projects that make the most sense for the organization. So we're selecting Project A. Project B probably has a lot of merit to it, but against Project A, it loses. Okay. Also know for the exam that the opportunity cost is the cost of the opportunity or that you didn't pick. And that's what it means by when you're selecting. So your opportunity cost is the cost of the opportunity that you didn't pick. Okay. So Project B's cost is the opportunity cost of picking A. Okay. I'll give you some test examples for this, but this is net present value. And again, it's just a project selection technique. And all I can do is give you more problems to do, but this is it. Formula doesn't change. It's not like EAC where there's any situation here. You're going to plug the numbers in, okay, that you're going to glean from. And like any other formula, they might flip it around and give you net present value and ask you to somehow figure out initial investment. You understand what I'm saying? They'll give you enough information where you're going to have to be able to flip around any formula and figure it out. Answer the question they ask you, but I sure they'll give you the answer. But that's it. That's the worst thing that they can do to you. All right, man. This is.
I don't think they would go this in depth on being a time test. Do you think?
I think you're going to see 3 or 4 questions like this. So if you're on top of and that's why I'm saying that maybe some of the things while you're doing these mock exams out there, practice on an on-board calculator. Because I'm telling you, the time consumption really is in the mechanics of doing these problems. You know, drawing out network diagrams, you might have to do that once or twice on the test, even though there might be a handful more questions about what network diagrams. The ones that they're going to actually make you draw something out might only be a couple. Same thing here with the net present value ones and the earnables. But I'm saying this, along with any other calculations, what'll slow you down is using the on-board calculator rather than the one that you're used to sitting next to you right now. So you might want to get used to using the on-board, even though if it's a pain in the ass and even though you don't like it, so that you can reduce your time from, and it might be just a few seconds that you need it. Okay, so that's something else to practice on, is to recreate the testing environment that you're going to be living under as close as you can. All right?
All right.
I'm going to put together some stuff for everybody. There'll be a couple of these. I could tell you what, I'll give you 3 or 4 of these. Okay, 3 of these. A few end value questions. Couple of that to do with current. Couple with forecasts. Maybe 3 or 4 with forecasts. And maybe another network diagram to draw through and give me just one, identify paths and stuff, just so I know you still know how to do it. Okay?
Okay, sounds like.
And we'll pick it up on Monday with procurement management.